Good
everyone, and
evening.
welcome to
Good evening.
good evening, and welcome to Night School. I'm Lynn,
And I'm Christina.
and we're part of the Nightlife team at Cal Academy in San Francisco. Nightlife is our weekly Thursday night events where we mix science with a little live music and cocktails. Last year, we moved Nightlife online, and here we are with Night School. Every Thursday night with you all at home. We'll bring you a new theme and some new fun friends every week. And this week is all about the wolf.
And thanks all of you for saying where you're howling in from. Very on theme. And also we wanted to say that if you're seeing a lot of bots right now in the comments, we have someone working on that. So be patient, but we do see them. But anyway, tonight with wolves, first up, we have Kent Laudon, who has been working with wolves for 23 years now. So ask him anything. He's currently a wolf specialist with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and he'll talk about wolf ecology and the work of building a new wolf management program for the state. Bridgett vonHoldt is an associate professor at Princeton University, and she studies wolf genes, and she'll talk about one incredible find, North America's endemic red wolf and the coyote population that carries their endangered genes. And then finally, wildlife photographer Steve Woods, who spent time last summer following a pack of endangered coastal wolves that lives on the remote outer islands of British Columbia. He has some amazing images and video ahead to share, so don't miss it.
And as always, tonight's program is live. So say hi, continue to let us know where you're watching from. Let us know if it's your first time watching or you're a Night School regular. We'll have Q&As after everyone's talk, so make sure to add any questions you have in the chat. Without further ado, we'll pass it over to Bridgett.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to be here. And I'm here to talk to you about what my research group, I think, has recently discovered, which is a really amazing new insight into the history of wolves in North America. So without further ado, this is a picture, my opening slide. I'm going to be talking about ghosts in the American Southeast. And those ghosts are referring to some genetic variation of an endangered species that we're finding that still persists on the landscape. And this whole story started with an email. Now, I get several email, dozens a year, where people love to email me pictures and stories about their dogs, sometimes pictures from their trail cams. And a lot of times they're incredibly heartfelt and just lovely stories. But I wanted to show you this picture because this actually spoke to me. This is a picture from Ron Wooten. He's a wildlife photographer. And I know this picture is blurry. I've actually zoomed in quite a bit because this is a distance picture. This is a coyote sleeping on a runway at Galveston Airport in Galveston, Texas. Now, Galveston is a little island off the coast of Texas in the Gulf of Mexico. And this picture actually stopped and caught my attention. It stopped me from reading my other email. And when I looked at this picture, I thought there were some really interesting things about this coyote. First off, in my mind, I thought this doesn't really look like a typical coyote. And when I zoomed in, as you're seeing here, this blurry vision, I actually thought this looked more like a red wolf. And here's a picture, this little inset of a captive red wolf. And I really thought there's got to be something here. And I followed up with an email. And ever since then, Ron's been working with my research group to try to understand these really interesting coyotes living on Galveston Island. So the backdrop of this is that there are several species of canine that live in North America. And I'm showing you pictures now here of all four of them. The red wolf I've just introduced to you in the lower right. You see the coyote, which is in the upper left circle. It has this very specific look about it. But when you kind of zoom out and just see a canine perhaps running along in the shadows of a field or something, it can be really hard to tell the difference between which species you see depending upon where you live. There are two other canine species in North America. That's the eastern wolf. This is a wolf that lives in southeastern Canada. And then there's the gray wolf, and I think this is the one we're most familiar with. This is like the wolf that lives in the Rocky Mountains and in Yellowstone Park in Idaho and that region. So the story I really want to capture is this dynamic between red wolves and coyotes, and the history that we really need to just kind of remind ourselves is that of the red wolf in North America. Now, the red wolf has been documented in the United States over the past 10,000 years through fossil records and other sort of museum specimens. And its historic distribution is highlighted here in the pink shaded area. These fossil remains indicate that the red wolf roamed from central Texas all the way through Florida and up to the mid-Atlantic region. And this was the case for several thousand years. What really became kind of problematic for the red wolf is about 100 years ago when predator control programs and landscape conversion, thinking about agriculture at that point, the red wolf became a target for extermination and was losing its habitat. In about the middle of early 1970s, the Endangered Species Act was established, and this new policy afforded extra protection and attention for the red wolf, as this was a species identified to be on its way towards extinction, and efforts were made to try to preserve it. What happened was that the last few red wolves were found physically observed in the Gulf Coast area of Texas and Louisiana, and that's what this little inset box shows. Some of the last red wolves were identified in these wildlife refuges, identified by the green spaces numbered 1 through 3. And here you can also see Galveston Island is highlighted just there in the Gulf of Mexico. So in the early 1970s, when the red wolf was placed on the Endangered Species Act, got the protection under Endangered Species Act, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service made an effort to go out and try to live capture the last few red wolves in the wild. But because there were coyotes also in the region, this was a large effort. So they ended up trapping over a few hundred canines and went through excruciating detail to evaluate and assess each individual to determine who were red wolves. At the end of this effort, this 4-year effort, they identified 14 red wolves that were then going to be the founders of their species survival plan. This is the captively bred population in zoos and other facilities. So these 14 animals were translocated into captive facilities for breeding. Reproduction was fairly successful, and over the next 10 years, the population grew. At about late 1980s, the population was so healthy, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife established a recovery program where they could release now 8 founder red wolves into the wild of North Carolina. And the population has essentially thrived there ever since. In the past 10 years, the program has been slotted for closure, so the last red wolves have been essentially identified to move back into captivity. As of last month, there's only 10 red wolves that remain in the wild. So how does this come back to Galveston? Well, remember, Galveston is next door to where the last wild red wolves were found. And because I think this coyote looks very interesting, I wanted to use genetic tools to ask, does this Galveston coyote carry any ancestry relating to red wolf, or is it just purely a coyote that has some really interesting features about it? Now, the reason I do think we might be able to find red wolf genes in our Galveston animals is because we know that in the past 100 years, there actually had been documented cases of hybridization between red wolves and coyotes. And this was a spatial trend that is documented through, again, museum collections and finding these interesting specimens that are thought to be red wolves but have features that are similar to coyotes. So this is what we wanted to explore. And bringing this back to Galveston, here's another picture by Ron Wooten. This is an incredible picture that shows us that packs of these animals are thriving on the island of Galveston. However, there are some challenges to their existence. Not only just living in a human community, there's also collisions with cars. So there's a high mortality rate. for these animals. But in speaking to Ron and really having this excitement that we want to know more about the genetics of these unique animals, Ron was able to collect a couple roadkill carcasses and send us some tissue so we could do some genome sequencing. And this was performed, and the samples were received and processed by two lovely ladies in my lab. My former grad student, Dr. Liz Heppenheimer, she's now graduated and moved on. And Dr. Kristen Bresky, she was a postdoc in my lab, and she now runs her own lab as faculty at Michigan Tech. So Kristen and I are still working on this project together, but this story starts with these two samples that were roadkill. Both Kristen and Liz managed to prep these samples and sequence their genomes, and in order to learn about their ancestry, we compared them to several other reference canines of North America. So if we wanted to know about coyote ancestry, we had coyotes from the local region to compare. We had gray wolves from the Rocky Mountains, eastern wolves, as I said, and then these captive bred red wolves that represented our canonical idea of what a red wolf is. And we sequenced their genomes and compared them to try to identify what we can learn about ancestry. Our first analysis was to conduct a principal component analysis, which is just to see how clear the genetic data might resolve our canine groups. And you see here from these nice clustering of similar colored dots that each of these species do form clusters. And those two little pink stars are the two Galveston coyote roadkills that we sequenced. If they were only just coyote genetics involved, we would expect that those two stars cluster with the rest of the coyote dots. But they are very interestingly placed somewhere between the coyote group and the red wolf cluster. So this meant we actually had something that we could investigate further. And when we have mystery samples that we don't quite know what species they belong to, or if they're a mixture of something, we can perform what's called an assignment analysis. And I'm going to run through what this graph looks like for you here quickly. An assignment analysis is one way to kind of identify the species composition of a sample where we're not quite sure what it is. We get these ancestry proportions for each individual animal. So each animal is represented by a vertical bar, and the color of the bar can tell us something about the species or ancestry that's identified. So in this example, you see two vertical bars. One is fully blue, and that's from a coyote, as the picture represents above it. And the next one is orange. That's a 100% red wolf example. Its picture is below it. Now, for sake of understanding what different ancestry proportions might look like, I'm going to just show you two little examples here of what we might be able to find. The first example is a mystery canine number 1. This one shows equal partitions of orange and blue, so we would end up reading this graph as saying that canine has about 50% genetics similar to red wolf and the other half coyote. Similarly, canine number 2 shows a predominant genetic signature of coyote, but it still seems to carry about 20% red wolf genetics. So we apply this technique, this ancestry analysis, to our two Galveston canines and our reference canines to understand what species those two Galveston animals might carry. And we compared them to southeastern coyotes and red wolves. Those were the two primary species of question. And our two Galveston coyotes come out as being a really interesting mix. This was almost entirely unexpected, that we found an average of 30% of the genetics identified as red wolf ancestry in these coyotes. And I do have to say, this was some of the highest percentages I've seen, and I've been working in canine genetics for some time. So we thought this is really important. To move a little further, something that always has caught my attention is trying to understand the genomic composition of this. So because we've sequenced their genomes, and we now know we can identify parts of chromosomes that belong to red wolf or coyote, we've started to make these really interesting chromosomal plots. So this is one of those Galveston animals, and I've spread out all the chromosomes for you here. So each chromosome is numbered, and coyotes, wolves, dogs, they all have 38 autosomes, and that's what you see here. And the y-axis is just giving us a physical length, so we can see the length of each chromosome. The orange blocks represent where in this coyote's genome we have sequenced and identified red wolf ancestry. And this leads to many more questions that we're currently looking into. But the size of these orange blocks and their distribution all is something that we can use to learn about deeper evolutionary history of how red wolf genes have made their way into the coyote genome. And what's really cool is that these red wolf alleles seem to persist in these coyote populations, which leads me to my final take-home sort of message and pitch here. First of all, we're calling this ghost alleles, ghost genetic variation, because these coyotes in Texas and Louisiana, as we're finding, they're carrying red wolf ancestry in their genomes, yet red wolves, as we know it, have been extinct in the wild for 30-something years, 30-ish years. But how are we still finding their genes persisting in these coyotes? So we're really curious as to going back through some of the museum collections and the fossils to learn about where and when red wolf ancestry was found on the landscape, in coyotes, and in other geographic regions. We're also using this as an opportunity to encourage the species survival plan, Fish and Wildlife, to all think about what endangered means. We know that we have new genetic variation that might be beneficial to the captive red wolf population, but we also have a conversation of trying to think about endangered genes now. How can we utilize and harness some of this new genetic variation to help persist protection and the presence of these red wolves in our captive breeding programs and hopefully on the wild landscape again in the future? So the story keeps going. There will be lots more that we learn about these unique coyotes that live not only in Texas, but across the American Southeast. We're continuing with all of our genomic efforts, and stay tuned. There's going to be more from us in the future. So I want to thank you for inviting me to tell you my story about red wolves, and I'm so happy to take any questions you have.
Hi, Bridget.
Hi.
We do have a good amount of questions.
Okay.
There are a bunch of clarifying questions, so I guess
Yeah.
I'm just going to start there. So first one is, are wolves and coyotes of the same species?
They are not. Wolves are, they're gray wolves, red wolves, and eastern wolves. Those each have a different species name, and coyotes also have a different species. So coyotes are Canis latrans, gray wolves, Canis lupus, red wolves are Canis rufus, and eastern wolves are Canis lycaon. So different species, but they can all interbreed, as well as interbreeding with dogs.
So that is the next question, is how can different species hybridize? Did they mate? Yeah.
Yep, that's a really great question. And the definition that, so there are many ways to define species and the requirements that you might have for what makes a species. And scientists argue about this quite frequently. So there isn't just one go-to definition that everyone agrees upon. The one that I really like is a very complicated definition that involves many levels of measuring very different things. Breeding between two groups can be one way to define it, but it kind of misses a lot of really lovely nuances and differences. So yes, dogs, wolves, coyotes can all interbreed. They have viable offspring who can also reproduce themselves. But the way we define species ends up being a little more complicated than that.
And then there's another question kind of along the same lines. Does interbreeding between species reduce fertility?
It can, and that's something that we're still trying to determine if we see any of that between the canine lineages. As you get more distantly related groups, fertility of their hybrid offsprings are often expected to be reduced. So they might be fully sterile or just sort of partially experiencing reproductive problems. Canines don't seem to have that, but we're still not really sure how any of those problems might actually manifest. So it could be there. We just probably have to look a little bit harder to understand the nuance of it.
Here's another one. How would you distinguish persistent red wolf genes in coyotes from a recent hybridization event?
That's a really great question. I wish I had more than 15 minutes because I have lots of graphs to show you how we can do that. I was kind of hinting at the distribution of blocks, the red wolf ancestry blocks, and their size in the genome. So that is one way in which we can start estimating how old this event had to have been. So we can put a date in terms of generations as to how long ago these red wolf genes actually first appeared in the coyote genome. And we can differentiate whether this was 10,000 years ago or 100 years ago. And what I showed you tonight was far more recent. We were able to detect that this had been happening in the past 100 years.
Oh, I feel like that's fairly recent then.
It is fairly recent. Yes, I mean, it goes in line with what some of the earlier slides I showed by Ron Nowak, who showed the hybridization at the turn of the century. So it's really nice that we found that with genetic data. I mean, I find a little bit of relief in the methods that we can have independent corroboration.
I think we have time for one more question. Let's see. Can you elaborate on what gene conservation of red wolves might look like? I.e., how might future practices benefit red wolf survival?
Yeah, so there's been, this is a really good question, and I don't know, I'm going to try to keep it a short answer. Some of the ideas that we're throwing around in some of these discussions is trying to leverage new genetic variation that might be able to be brought into the captive breeding program. Now, this kind of goes against a lot of the tradition and the scope of how captive breeding programs work. But we're at this point where I think genomic tools can help us identify ancestry as a target goal, that if we want to include some new genetic variation, we can do it in a very planned way. There's been some examples of planned introgression in other endangered species and groups that have been successful. So this wouldn't be the first time to think about it, but it certainly goes against the grain of what typically these captive breeding programs aim at. So we're hoping that we can find new genetic variation to bolster the genetic health and provide just some of this historic genetic variation that we thought was extinct and is not found in our captive animals in the captive breeding program.
Cool. Thank you so much, Bridgett. This was fascinating.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Up next, we have Kent, who will be talking more about wolf ecology and building a new wolf management program for the state.
Hello, you hear me okay?
Yes, now we can.
You can hear me? Okay.
Yep.
Should I just start rolling?
Go for it.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm seeing people are from all over the United States, it looks like. I think I even saw Whitefish, Montana, where I used to live. I saw Mexico, so that's pretty fun. I'm here to talk to you today very quickly about wolves in California, pretty new as far as the entire US goes. And if you can just give me a second here, I'm going to try to find my presentation so I can start going through it. Right there's a map of the United States, of course, and showing roughly current distribution of wolves in the United States. You can see here actually showing California, the newcomers to a wolf expansion. And we'll talk more about how that has all happened, but here, let's just start with the Northern Rockies. And the blue line here is Northwest Montana, and you can see way back into the early part of the 80s, where wolves were starting to come back on their own from Canada. And then, of course, we have the reintroductions to Yellowstone, which is the yellow line here, and then central Idaho. Those reintroductions occurred at the same time, and you can see here that all of those different areas in after 1997, 96 had all about the same amount of wolves. The Yellowstone and central Idaho populations take off, and northwest Montana continues to be a very slow growing population. I should say Idaho is where I started my wolf career back in 1997. So roughly this period in here. And then I came over to northwest Montana, where I started right here. And so you could see here, this is how the population grew before that. And then after I showed up, the population started to rapidly grow. And I was a pretty busy boy then. Here's some of our detections of uncollared wolves throughout Northern California. And a lot of those come from trail cams. And here's just a smattering of different pictures. I think that colored one on the right there is actually a rancher took a picture of a wolf that he saw. Unfortunately, it was over a dead calf, which is part of the reality of wolves in a lot of Western states. And now here's the radio collar data. It's a little bit behind as of this year, but previous to this year, this is what we had for different radio collared animals coming to California from Oregon. Each one of those collars represents a different wolf. And when I say radio collars, I mean satellite collars. So these are actually collars that are tracked by satellites on a number of different locations per day. So very cool technology. The orange up here is OR44. His radio collar failed and his status is currently unknown. I think here, my screen is very small here. It's hard to see, but I think this, the blue here is the famous OR7 that came to California way back in 2011. And we've been in the wolf business, if you will, ever since. The black one, I think, is OR25, who later went back to Oregon, where he died, and OR59, who died in our state, was shot. Unfortunately, that's a reality with wolves too. And number in yellow line here is OR54, who had been dispersing for 22 months. She is offspring from OR7. And it's probably good to know during that time of her dispersal, she traveled from, you could see down here about I-80 and all the way as far north as west of Bend, Oregon. During that 22 months, she was measured to do a minimum mileage of over 8,700 miles. And because of that, there had been some media reports on her. So you could probably Google her story. Here's the current distribution of wolves in California. We still don't have very much except for these dispersers, a handful of dispersers running around who can travel thousands of miles. But we do have down here the southernmost, we call that the last impact. They have now had 4 years of reproduction starting in 2017. Last year, previous to last year, they had a new male come into the pack, and because of that, he bred 2 of the females, and we had a double litter there. Up north there, we call that the whaleback pair. It's a brand new pair. It's the male is OR85, and he came down from California, entering the state about beginning of November. And he is from north of La Grande, Oregon. And soon after he came into the state, we noticed that tracks of 2 in the snow, and then eventually getting him on a trail cam. And that's actually a picture of him right there with the wolf that he's traveling with, that we are 95% sure is a female. If all of that is true, we expect that there likely will be another batch of pups or 2 different breeding packs of wolves come next month. We're just coming off the breeding season, which was last month, and a 63-day gestation period. And so we'll have, that'll be April is when wolves have their pups. Here's just some basic facts about wolves, or wolf ecology, if you will. For people that don't know, a pack is essentially a family group, most often anyway, and with the breeding female and the breeding male, and the rest of the wolves being their offspring, typically. And that includes pups of the year, pups from the previous year, we call yearlings, and then maybe even some adults that are still hanging on with the pack. Otherwise, animals at some point in their young lives, they take off, and that's what we call dispersal, and that's how that wolf population has continued to expand from Yellowstone and central Idaho, eventually to Oregon, and then eventually to California. There's some other facts in there. Average litter size is about, well, I have 4 there, but probably 4 to 6, let's call it 5. I've seen litters as high as 11 pups. I said there, breeding seasons in February. Average home range size, lots of places, about 200 square miles. You can see down in the bottom there that the Lassen pack has about a 500 square mile home range. We think there's about 6 wolves in the pack right now. And the whaleback pair, of course, is the 2 wolves that we think might be new breeders, and they have a home range size. That is actually incorrect there. It's about 480 square miles. Principally, they feed on deer and elk in California, other places that would include things like moose. And of course, unfortunately, cattle and other domestic livestock. Wolves are also big scavengers, so they will eat dead animals as well. So talk about the livestock part here, and I think the most important points to make here is a lot of places, wolf habitat that we would expect wolves to settle, and that certainly has been true for the first breeding pairs in California, is going to be a strong overlap with agriculture and livestock. So trying to figure out how to fit a predatory species that sometimes prey on livestock and sometimes could be a threat to people's livelihoods. How do we work with local communities, local ranchers, to try to have good communication and relationships where we could try to work together to do some creative things to try to deter conflict or wolves killing livestock to the extent possible. And here's just a kind of a cool picture of a wolf. This is a really common thing of wolves where they overlap with livestock, traveling through cattle all the time. That's a daily thing that happens everywhere throughout the Western U.S. This is actually a Mexican wolf near livestock, near some cattle there. Some of the deterrent measures that we have. Here's foxlight here. It flashes randomly different colors and different patterns, and trying to simulate maybe a distant flashlight in a pasture of a flashlight kind of waving around. And that's a scare device that's employed. We have it on one ranch's winter on a small sheep ranch. Here's what we call fladry. It's these red flags. It's brought over from Eastern Europe where people used it to actually funnel wolves to shoot them. We've brought it over here to protect livestock. There's something about it that wolves do not want to cross it. Perhaps it's scary to them. These days we have it on a turbo electric wire. So in hopes that if they do become habituated to the flattery, that they will maybe, and to try to test it, that they get zapped and reinforce that it is a scary thing. And here's some folks setting it up in on a ranch in California. Here's on another ranch in California. And here's a pretty cool picture where with wolf tracks right down this lane following the flattery there. We don't have any indication that wolves have ever crossed flattery, and we have not so far lost any livestock while they were within the flattery. There has been 2 cases where the ranchers had a need to take the cattle out of the flattery. And on those occasions, once removed from the flattery, and each one had an occasion of a calf being killed by wolves. And then we do the investigations when we have a dead calf or what have you. We'll go out there to do the investigation to find out first, did the animal die of an attack, and if so, what was the causing predator? And all of a sudden, I guess I don't understand what's going on with my slides. They don't have, oh, this is interesting. It's not showing the content, but all of a sudden it does show the content. But I don't know if this is going to work. This is supposed to be a video. Can this play on, do you guys know?
Yeah, the video is playing.
It is?
Yeah, we see gray wolves in California, female yearling and pups. Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so press play. It was played.
How do I press play?
It was good. Maybe refresh, and it started playing when you refreshed. So go back one slide and then come back to this one. Maybe.
Okay. Boy, I am just messing it up for everybody right now, aren't I?
No,
How's that?
as long as we get to see the wolf video.
I know, it's the most important thing in my whole talk.
Is
it going now?
Can you get to that play button in the middle of the screen? There we go.
Is it going?
Yes.
This is from 2 years ago, 2 summers ago. That is the breeding female right there, wearing her collar, her satellite collar. That collar has died, and another cool thing with the technology is when the collar dies, it falls off. And of course, there's the pups in tow. And that is a yearling female who would become the second breeder, that animal right there. And we know all of this because of the DNA. She was the one that produced the second litter this following summer or last summer. And then, so that part, that last little howling part is what makes that pretty cool. And that's pretty hard to capture too. Let me see where see if I could find, it's not very intuitive. I can't really see. Oh, good. This is interesting. I have to go past them and then I see them. Is that playing now?
Not yet. Try hitting spacebar. It should start. Ooh. Or
No.
just try to do what you did last time where you press the play button in the middle of your slides. There we go. Oh, no. Go back. Yes.
So this is a batch of pups from this year. 2 different litters from those 2 different females. And it's there's 8 pups here, as you can see. There were a total of 9, and that 9th one's just not in the video there. And I think then that is all that I have for you. And open it up for questions if we have time.
Yeah, we have time. All right. So we have a lot of questions for you. Let's see. So a question is, so what are with more gray wolves coming into California, what are some of the possible habitat and prey conflicts between gray wolves and mountain lions? Is that an issue?
That's a good question. I like to think of it that it's the old cat and dog thing. It's just with the big ones out in the wild. And so I don't think that they have a lot of tolerance for each other. And there have been cases where lions have killed wolves and wolves have killed mountain lions. Not any of that documented so far in California, but certainly in other places.
And then, do you have any info on the male wolf found near Yosemite recently? Is this a good thing, a hopeful thing?
Yeah, I can't believe that I forgot that.
Yeah,
he is down there. He is in Mono County. Last location, he has not downloaded for 5 days now, so we actually don't know where he is right now. There are some that think that those when we have those data gaps for days without any locations, that those are correlated to long distance movements. So if that's true, he may be in a very different location right now. We just don't know what it is. He entered the state in the beginning of February, and he was just traveling very quickly on a very strong southerly trajectory. Blew right by I-80. Lots of times wolves, those interstates can act like a barrier. Lots of times they what I call bounce off. You can see them kind of approaching. We don't really track those wolves in real time. We'll get about 4 locations per day, and you'll see those locations getting closer to the interstate and then moving away. He found a way to cross it. And that's about all I could say. You know, I have to believe the further south that you go away from that source, the main source population of wolves, he has to be going to an area that has less and less wolves. So it would be interesting how he figures it out. The other thing that kind of cool to think about those dispersing wolves, if you think about it, they have no idea where they're going. They've never been there before. So they're kind of learning as they're going. And sometimes they can end up in interesting places, and maybe sometimes places that they'd rather not find themselves in, like the edges of towns, for instance.
Yeah. Related to that, like, what is the usual range of a wolf, and how far can they travel in a day? Like, what's the longest you've ever seen a wolf travel?
On those daily travels, those daily mileages, I actually put that together for OR 54. Like I said, over those 22 months, she had traveled a minimum distance of 8,700 miles. And I say minimum because all I do is I connect the dots, those locations, not how she actually goes from point to point. And I think it was something like on 3 24-hour periods, she had covered over, again, a minimum of over 50 miles. I think
Wow.
maybe 15 of those days she had done a minimum of over 40 miles, just to give you an idea. So they're
Yeah.
built for that. They have they're thin animals. They have the really long legs. One way I
Hmm.
like to look at it is kind of the wolves are kind of like the long distance runners of the animal world.
Okay.
And if we compare to the mountain lion, they're more like the gymnasts of the animal world.
They can do amazing flips.
Well, they're just very strong. They're
Yeah.
muscular, right? And the predators, their whole lifestyle is built around that. So lions, mountain lions, they're more of an ambush animal. Wolves are more like testing, running after their prey, kind of a thing. And so
Hmm.
they're just built for those different hunt styles.
Awesome. And then so last year, do you have any sense of what the level of impact was on wolves from last year's wildfires across California?
We don't think that there's any. There was one fire that kind of clipped the edge of the Lassen Pack's home range, but it's
Hmm.
really kind of the edge that they don't go to very often. And I think they actually did travel through part of it or near it, the fire perimeter, on one occasion. Yeah, but there's nothing that we've been able to detect so far.
Interesting. Let's see. Um, so does anything change protection-wise when a wolf enters, you see them enter federal land versus when they're not? Like, how does that change your work, if anything?
As far as what? I mean, I
Just
don't
like
think
when a wolf
anything.
enters federal land, protect nothing.
The protections don't really change. Wolves are protected under California's Endangered Species Act. Some people may know that are listening today that wolves have been delisted by the federal government, by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and that took place in January, early January this year. But
Mhm.
wolves are still fully protected under California's own version of ESA. Um, uh, there's the Lassen Pack, for instance, and this is probably true for the new pair. Lives on that 500 square mile home range. Has different kind of land ownerships, private timber companies,
Mhm.
U.S. Forest Service, and private individuals. And so throughout that entire area, including Forest Service, private timber, and private individuals, livestock exists through all of that. So the Lassen Pack are moving through livestock pretty much, especially in the summertime, on a daily basis. I think that's probably the most significant thing there, but it
Mhm.
doesn't really change between land ownership.
Okay. And I think we have time for one more. And I've seen this question a couple times. Are there any issues with the fact that radio caller locations are public knowledge? Is that the case?
They're not public
Okay.
knowledge.
Yeah.
No. So you'll see that we don't post those
Hmm.
for obvious reasons. We do talk about things in a more general way. You
Hmm.
saw those maps there. That's generally where the wolves live. But of course, that's the last impact. For instance, you're talking about 6 wolves that live in this 500 square mile mountainous landscape. So your chances of actually running into a wolf or seeing a wolf is very, very low. Yeah, so we do share some information where we think that there are clustered locations that could mean potentially dead cattle, for instance.
Hmm.
And we will share that information with the local producer because we do have to figure out if wolves killed the cattle or
Hmm.
even if they didn't. And that's all good data both ways to have. And the ranchers that we work pretty closely with, and they are super cooperative and good to work with.
Okay, well, thanks so much for joining us tonight, Kent.
Thank
great
you.
to have you. And up next, we have photographer Steve Woods.
Hey everybody, how's it going? It's very lovely to be here. Okay, so firstly, I'm just going to kind of introduce myself a little bit and then kind of get to the presentation afterwards. So yeah, hello everyone. It's lovely to be here with you all, and especially to get to listen to the other speakers. I'm so humbled to be a part of such an esteemed panel. I think this year has been so difficult for so many people, but there's some really wonderful silver linings, such as these kinds of events. For everyone to be able to join in together digitally from around the world and share ideas and experiences is just truly a wonderful thing. And I think it's excellent. So I really hope this kind of stuff carries on after the pandemic as well. So thanks to all of you guys for joining in and being interested. Some really interesting questions. I would have liked to ask my own questions of those guys. Maybe I'll get to do that later. But yeah, thanks also to the guys at California Academy of Sciences, like, for dreaming up such an interesting project and putting it on. So yeah, my name's Steve Woods. I'm a wildlife and conservation photographer. And so I basically, I'm trying to document and tell the stories of the wonderful wildlife that we have on our planet in order to raise awareness and help facilitate a change in attitudes towards certain animals or causes and the kind of natural world as a whole. My work largely supports the actual research that people like Ken and Bridgett do so that we can bring the whole story to the public. I'll be completely honest. It's the research of those guys, Ken and Bridgett, and all the wonderful other scientists like them that are the key here. And people like myself, we just kind of play an important, but definitely a supporting role for those guys in order to kind of bring the whole, story to the public. As you can probably tell by my accent, I'm originally from the UK. I've moved around the world working in different areas from the equator to the Arctic, and finally, or at least for now, ended up based out of the rich, biodiverse, temperate rainforests of British Columbia. It's been really wonderful to hear Bridgett and Kent speak, and I've learned so much from those guys. But I'm going to try and offer you a slightly different perspective here, I guess. I'm going to talk to you about what it's like to photograph these wonderful animals and shoot a cover story on a pack of coastal wolves on the remote outer islands of British Columbia. Some highs, some lows, and a very nice ending. So. And obviously, questions and so on like that are more than welcome. After everything, please remember them, type them down, and I'll try and deal with everything. So this whole story came about, a couple of us were sitting around a campfire in BC at the height of the COVID pandemic. We were doing a story on the life cycle of endangered western toads, and got to talking about wolves, as you do around a campfire in Canada. Earlier that year, this is 2019, I'd been tracking a pack of coastal wolves, and I'd spent a good amount of time trying to photograph them. I knew that there was a great story there. I just wasn't quite sure about how it would pan out at the time. And sitting around that campfire, my buddies Maxwell and Paul were keen to come along and create some inspiring images and video in order to support the work of various NGOs and scientists in the area who are trying to protect the coastal carnivores, as well as also having a great time photographing the wolves. It's been wonderful watching Kent's bits of clips there. It just brings it all rushing back to me. There's absolutely nothing better for me than getting to experience and watching nature in the flesh. When we were thinking about this, we had absolutely no idea what was in store for us, as you'll find out as it comes up. As we started to put the expedition together, we got word that there was a beach sperm whale in the area where I'd last seen the pack that year. This was excellent news because we knew that there was a strong possibility that the wolves that would have just pupped at that point, they would have den down and then pupped, would be in search of calories, and a dead whale has a lot of calories. As we neared our start date, the wonderful weather of the Pacific Northwest climate started to have its way with us. The weather was fierce and the rain rolled in from a storm. It was looking really unlikely that our pilots would fly due to the safety concerns, but thankfully a small weather window opened up, giving us an opportunity that we instantly took. We loaded up the planes with 600 pounds worth of gear, some supplies, and is always the case in this situation, a very small bag of personal items. Why does cameras always take precedent? As we flew low over the forests of beautiful British Columbia, it's so beautiful up there, but the logging is so stark, it's clear. The loss of the natural habitat is obvious and the clear cuts are everywhere, only visible from an altitude, because up there as you fly along, you can just, see it over the landscape. Whereas when you're lower down, it's cleverly kind of felled in order to preserve the aesthetics from the ground. So through the low cloud and the rain, the white sand beach where we were going to land came into view. Our pilot circled a couple of times to recce the best landing spot, which was a razor thin strip of hard, damp sand sandwiched between the soft, dry sand upstairs and then the unstable sludge near the water's edge. I'll admit me and Paul who were on the last plane to land definitely breathed a sigh of relief as we landed safely. Our pilot was an expert. She was great. Early the next morning, under the cover of darkness before dawn, we slipped out of our tents, geared up and trekked along the beach in the pouring rain. We were headed to the hides that we'd strategically placed the day before at the tip of the small headland where the whale was. And we crawled into our hides on the first day that would turn out to be one of the most memorable and exhilarating experiences of my life. What I'll do at this point is I will just start to share some slides for you. This is me and Maxwell in one of the aeroplanes flying out. And these are our hides. These are our hides where we'd kind of set up to go. So usually when you enter these hides, you settle in and expect hours, days, even weeks of inaction as the animals you're trying to photograph slowly get used to the humans hiding inside them. This was very different. No sooner had we managed to get into our hides and get into position, cameras dried off from the rain, a whole pack of coastal wolves sprinted onto the beach in front of us. They came out just from the back there and then run straight out in front of us. They fanned out onto the beach and proclaimed to the beach and the forest that this was their territory by letting out an incredible amount of howls, all of them just kind of howling at the forest. From the youngest to the oldest, the howls were so loud they were audible over 1 kilometer away at the base camp. They could be heard over the crashes of the waves of the Pacific Ocean, which is right in front of us there, as it just washed up near our feet as it was low tide. What I'm going to try and do now is play for you a video which just it's just an iPhone video, but it recorded the howls of the wolves as they were howling at us. And if I'm sure some of you have, if anyone's ever heard wolves howling, it's such a spine-tingling thing. It would just run down the back of your spine and you will never forget it. So let me just see if I can share this one. So there's our hides, and you can see them just in the very distance, and that's the back of my head photographing them there. It was absolutely, let me just go back to the presentation. It was absolutely amazing, as you can hear, just absolutely fantastic. Okay, so this is me in the hide there, enjoying some time off. As the wolf howled and the rain poured down, the adrenaline just kicked us into action and we started to photograph and film the scene. There were 4 of us in 2 separate hides, a few meters from each other, and none of us could believe what was happening, let alone we could have anticipated it. We counted upwards of 10 wolves and stared on in disbelief as the adults of the pack trotted up the beach in search of food. We were left wondering whether this was the first meeting would also be our last. We drank some hot coffee and, still shaking from the excitement, we then caught a glimpse of what would prove to be the key factor in the success of our expedition. To our sheer disbelief, a total of 7 wolf cubs trotted out onto the beach in front of us, and they started to play in the slowly rotting kelp as the dawn broke. This meant that the wolves were there in the area to stay. Because they had pups, they weren't going to leave until the pups were older. I think the survival of all of these 7 cubs, like especially up to when we left, they were all alive. I think the survival of that is in no small part down to the beached whale. Occurrences like that are so few and far between, but have such a massive impact on local wildlife. And this will support the pack and give them a boost that I think will be, felt for years to come in terms of the numbers and the family orientation. As the shoot progressed, we started to identify individuals and their behaviors. There's a couple of the cubs here. One that stood out for me so much was the mother of these cubs, or at least I assume she was the mother of the cubs. There was another female hanging around her that stayed with her. It didn't seem that was the mother, but this is just an assumption. I'm not 100% sure. I'll leave that to the scientists. It was so interesting to see how she was so charismatic, so interesting to see how she would behave. She would always stay behind with the cubs as the other adults head up the beach to go and scavenge. And she was the one that we saw the most and we worked with the most. It was this relationship that really kind of developed over the time and allowed us to get some of the best shots and video of the trip. There was no doubt she was the most handsome of the pack. She was absolutely gorgeous, beautiful chestnut eyes and fur that kind of morphed from black to rusty tan, depending on whether it was kind of raining or not. The tones of the kelp that we were photographing as well kind of complemented her in her appearance. We had some of the most unique moments with this particular wolf. This is actually the second wolf that's standing over the sperm whale carcass, which is severely decomposed at this point. In order for the mother to communicate to the cubs that the coast was clear and they could play out in the open, she would come and sit near us. This is something that happens a lot with certainly Paul Nicklin, one of the guys who's with us, has photographed wolves a lot before, and as well as Christina, and the mother will always come over and sit next to you or sit near you. It's so interesting to break down this behavior. Sometimes she would look at us, but a lot of times she was just facing away, seeming with no care in the world. This is a clear signal to us. This is a clear signal to her cubs that we pose no threat. So that if she was comfortable, the cubs were comfortable, and then they, like this, could come out and play right in front of us. The other thing that she was trying to do is give a clear signal to us that she was communicating to us that she was not worried about our presence and that she was in control of the situation, almost intimidating us, albeit in a kind of unthreatening manner, to show us that she was there and present and ready to defend her cubs at all costs, but was completely relaxed with the situation and she was under control. It's so interesting as a photographer to look and learn and understand animal behavior, because that's how we get the shot. And to see her behavior was such an intelligent way of dealing with our presence that it really spoke to her kind of intelligence and her understanding of behavior and how to communicate with animals. This is her now. She's, if you see, she's actually, she's taking a leak in the rain, poor thing. Another incredible moment came late one evening. It had been raining incessantly for 4 or 5 days straight, as it does up here, and we were all growing really wary with the seemingly endless rain. I'd spotted a gap in the clouds late in the afternoon on the horizon, and it started to enlarge slowly. I knew that if it kept going that way, it was going to, the sunset was going to be epic because of the huge low bank of cloud that the sun would then kind of reflect off. Sure enough, as the rain started to ease, the skies just lit up. As this happened, she bolted out of the forest and onto the beach in front of us, prancing around, just seemingly ecstatic that the rain had stopped and the skies were clear as well. We were feeling exactly the same thing. And, you know, I think all of us would have joined her in a second if we could. She then proceeded to dig deep into the piles of kelp on the beach to find the warm, slowly biodegrading material underneath. And she then proceeded to roll around in her own kind of hot tub on the beach. The steam was just rising as she dug deeper. It was also really interesting to see, as you can see here now, that she's chewing and crunching fresh kelp there. At the same time that we were photographing these wolves, a huge effort was underway by Raincoast Conservation. Some of you may have heard of Raincoast. It's an organization based out of BC that works to protect the fragile ecosystems of the Pacific Northwest. Raincoast has been slowly but surely raising funds to buy out hunting tenures throughout the Great Bear Rainforest. And since 1990, they've been able to not only protect thousands of square kilometers of critical habitats in the Great Bear Rainforest, they've also been at the forefront of rigorous peer-reviewed science and community engagement, which is one of the biggest factors in conservation. One of the Raincoast's current initiatives is to buy out the hunting tenure of the Kitlope region of the Great Bear Rainforest. In 2019, they managed to raise the funds to put down the first $100,000 deposit. In 2020, Sea Legacy founders Paul Nicklin and Christina Mittermeier, Paul was with us on this trip, lent their voice to Raincoast's campaign, and using the videos and images that we'd created, was able to throw their kind of meat behind their social media campaigns, and they raised the rest of the $650,000 that they needed to achieve their goal. It's just an amazing success because now all hunting of coastal carnivores is prohibited throughout the Kitlope region. For me, the best part of this story is that the wolf mother, this is her, you can see she's just looking towards the sunset in the rain. For me, the best part is that this wolf mother that we met and spent time with ended up being such an important ambassador for her species, as well as helping so many other wolves, cougars, lynx, bears to live another day under the protections afforded to them by buying out the hunting tenures in the Kitlope region. Sometimes it's hard to watch man's rampant destruction of the natural world, and it's really difficult to work out how we can turn the tide. This story, though, like I feel is one of the real kind of successes, and I'm really happy of what she was able to achieve by just being so beautiful and giving us these absolutely wonderful images. Okay, so this wonderful mother has now graced the front pages of a number of magazines. It's been amazing to see the kind of outpouring of interest for her, including a 16-page spread. Actually, I just received it here. 16-page spread in Oceanographic magazine that's just landed on my doorstep. hopefully this is going to help, it's publicity like this in a kind of positive way that helps these animals and helps us hopefully kind of change negative attitudes towards them. We've all seen unbelievably terrible scenes of the mass hunting of wolves in the US at the moment. It's just been absolutely heartbreaking to see. Hopefully showing interesting images and engaging kind of stories like this raises the awareness and the kind of public perception of these animals so that we can kind of afford them more protections. I'm just going to scroll through another couple of slides. These are some of the images that I've taken for the magazine, and that then go directly to support other NGOs and scientists in their research or in their publications or in their campaigns to raise funds in order to kind of protect the habitats and these specific wolves. But after this, I'm going to show a little video that Maxwell and Paul and I kind of threw together with some help from other people in order to give you a kind of better feel and understanding about this, kind of wonderful Pacific Northwest area and the kind of story that we saw unfolding there. At the same time as you watch that, and at the moment, feel free to just think of any questions, write them all down. I'll try to kind of go through and answer them in any way. Also, if you ever want to feel the need, if you want to connect with me, and welcome to Google me and find out websites or Instagram, social media, and drop me a message, and that would be great. Okay, so I am now going to just load up this video for you, and here we go. And watch and listen and see what you think. Let me just see if we can get this to go.
So I got a call from a good friend who's a wolf specialist, and he let me know of an amazing habitat in a remote part of British Columbia, which would be perfect for coastal wolves if we wanted to photograph them. It's an intertidal zone full of reef, full of the perfect type of food that the wolves like to scavenge and hunt on. So I called my good friends over at Sea Legacy and explained to them the situation, that there might be a possibility to find some coastal wolves.
I love the opportunity to show people wolves in rain and stormy conditions, because they're out all year, and they're really such a dynamic animal to pursue.
We use our visuals at Sea Legacy or as a journalist or National Geographic or whomever with a camera to connect that audience, to make that connection with these animals. Are they the big bad wolf? No, they're incredibly beautiful, spiritual, thoughtful, charismatic, caring, gentle animals. And you can only do that through beautiful filmmaking or photography, where you give people an intimate look into the eyes and the soul and the hearts of these animals that they'll otherwise never get. And that's the conversation starter. And then it has to be based on science. People have to understand how fragile these wolves are, how fragile their ecosystems are.
The reason why we're here trying to photograph these wolves is so that we can show the people how beautiful and how wonderful they are as animals. They get such a bad reputation and they're under constant threat from hunters. If we can show people how amazing they are, hopefully we can start to turn the tide and stop them from being under pressure from humans.
That was our little video. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. I have to say, I've just been kind of delving through the comment section as that was playing, and I'm absolutely blown away. Like, it's so nice to be in the company of so many wonderful people who love wildlife and who love wolves as well. It's absolutely excellent. There's a load of kind of questions in there as well. Yeah, I'd love to answer them in any way I can. Don't hold back. Please ask about anything. Hey, Lynn.
Hi, Steve. First of all, that was beautiful. The first question, which you may or may not have an actual answer to, is someone asked, why is this bringing tears to my eyes? I thought that was really sweet.
I didn't even see that one. That's so nice. Thank you.
There are a lot of tears in the comments right now, so just know.
You know,
really
actually, I kind of do have an answer for that. Like, this is absolutely why I do what I do. Just remember what I said to start with. It's the hard work of the scientists, you know, who are the really core of these things. We just, you know, go out there and take pretty pictures and, you know, get wet and try and find and photograph these wonderful animals. But in like, to be able to connect and to, you know, generate that kind of reaction in other people is absolutely everything. I noticed one comment in there. I'm so sorry, I've forgotten the name, but of someone who just said, I'm donating right now. And it's like, that's everything for us, you know, for us to be able to generate that positive goodwill is excellent. So thank you guys very much.
Yeah, absolutely. You should, the comment section is just raving right now about the video. But let's do some actual questions. My first question is just, how long were you there? It just looks like it was a really long time. But just curious, how long were you there actually, like,
you know,
tracking the wolves?
it was probably one of the most productive shoots I've ever been on. We were there for, we weren't there for long. We were there for about a couple of weeks. Some of those images, it's a pack of wolves that a good friend of mine, Tom McPherson at Seaforth Expeditions, has been working with. I've been to different locations, kind of working with them. We've been monitoring them, trying to work out what's going on. But the majority of everything that you've seen that was shot there was, you know, kind of shot in about a kind of 7 to 10 day period. Like I said, it was one of the most productive shoots I've ever been on. And this is, largely because of the whale. I did see another kind of this leads into another kind of question I saw in the comments that I'll add into this, is because someone was saying, you know, why is the whale so important? There's loads of other, you know, life and so on like that. Yes, that is completely true, 100%. You know, coastal wolves have it really wonderful, you know, because the ocean, you know, washes up, every tide washes up a new bounty for them. However, if you've got 7 cubs and you have a rotting carcass with billions of calories, you can't not anchor to it, you know? So yes, the other wolves, the adult wolves, will run up the beach, and that largely they won't touch the whale at all. But to have a kind of you know, a really secure amount of food that's just waiting there, even if they don't eat it all the time, it's just like, you know, it's home base for them. So yeah.
Did you see them eating anything else besides the whale?
Yes, actually, there was one of the most amazing scenes I've ever seen. Was incredible. This kind of ethereal scene of this beautiful white sand beach, you know, in the kind of early dawn light, and the wolf mother, this kind of chosen not to give her a name at the moment, but she was running down the beach with an abalone shell in her mouth. And whether what she was doing with it, we don't know. It's, you know, you don't want to anthropomorphize anything, but whether she was bringing it back to the den, whether she was bringing it back to the pups, what she was doing, it was just so beautiful to see her running down the beach. Someone else said it looks like all her feet were off the ground, and they were at times, running down the beach with this beautiful abalone shell. The other thing that I saw regularly was these wolves eating biological matter. So they were eating organic matter, they were eating fresh kelp. And again, I do not know, I am not a scientist, I can only surmise, but it seemed that like this whale was putrid. When the wind was blowing the other way, it was great. When it came towards us, it was unbearable. But to see them eating this kind of really rotting flesh, it was almost like it was a palate cleanser that they were eating the kelp as well. I didn't know that they would do that, you know. So we didn't see them because we were stuck in one place. We didn't see them hunting deer or anything like this at all. But that's a kind of a smaller part of their diet.
Kind of on the flip side, did you see any other predators or scavengers?
I saw this question.
At the dead whale.
I saw this question, and it's such an interesting question because we did see other huge coastal carnivores. So we saw some of the biggest black bears we have ever seen. They were ginormous. You saw one in the video there. Absolutely ginormous. Now, wolves will eat bears. Wolves will tackle bears, which is something that I didn't know before. Wolves, you know, they do not like to mix, and bears are scared of the wolves. The bear walked down the beach. The wolves weren't on the carcass at that point. The bear walked down to the beach, walked right past the whale, sniffed the air, and walked on. And this was late in the summer, so it wasn't just coming out of hibernation. So I was very interested to see that the bear didn't even, you know, kind of go anywhere near the whale at all. The other thing that was really interesting to me was, you know, the trees are full of eagles. There's loads of seagulls around. You know, there's loads of crows around. Nothing else was scavenging on the whale at all. It was so interesting to see. There was obviously thousands upon billions of maggots and flies. They were having a really good time. And there was another type of bird, which unfortunately I don't know the name of, but they seemed to be scooping up the slick of the whale that was running out into the sea. Very small birds, almost like the Wilson storm petrel in you know, that just drinks the slick from fish on the top of the ocean. It just seemed to be collecting that. Again, I'm not 100% sure, but we didn't see any other scavengers on the whale at all. Even when, like when the wolves were there, obviously not, but even when the wolves weren't there and hadn't been there for hours, there was nothing else, no birds even.
Interesting.
Oh.
Another question, how did the wolves' behavior change towards you over time?
That was really interesting. You know, look, wolves are apex, and apex predators always have very advanced body language and kind of advanced kind of control over the situation, you know. They were at no point intimidated or, you know, kind of scared by our presence. They were wary, but not in a kind of a fearful way. They just, you know, think it's always best to stay away from, you know, anything new. We were not a food source for them. We were not enabling a food source for them, but we were also not preventing them from their food source. So they kind of learned that we were, you know, were in the middle. Like we weren't posing a threat, we weren't enabling them, and we weren't preventing them. To start with, you know, it was neutral. Yeah, to start with, I think the wolves' howls. That was the first, and really the only time they did it that much. So it kind of suggested to me that, I mean, whenever you're in a hide, the animals always know you're there. You're not trying to hide from the animal. You're trying to break up your appearance so you don't seem like a threat, especially because, you know, we've got forward-facing eyes. So the wolves knew we were there. I would like to say that they came out and howled in our direction to say, you know, look, this is us. We're here and we're not messing around. After that, slowly, you know, they became more and more comfortable with our presence. We were very careful not to kind of habituate them in any way. Obviously, there was, you know, no food around us. There was never any scraps. There was, you know, absolutely. However close they came, and however much you just kind of wanted to, oh, hello, you can't do that. You know, it's really important to keep a distance. For the wolf's safety, because the moment that animal becomes habituated in any way, it will be euthanized. So yeah, it was interesting to see how their behavior changed throughout the time we were there, especially the pups. Because of the mother's control of this situation, you know, she comes and sits down in front of us and then just kind of presides over the situation and allows the cubs to come out and play, but also informing us that, like, you know, don't mess around, but that she's comfortable. That was interesting to see how the cubs then kind of developed. Interestingly, on the very last day, we kind of took our luck in our own hands. Because we'd stuck in these hides for so long, we thought, to hell with it, we're just going to walk up the beach. We're going to kind of follow them and just see how they behave, see what they're up to. We went up there and we saw them, all of them just lying down on the floor after feeding all day. It was so funny because we were waiting in the hides and they were just around the corner, all lying there all day long. It was frustrating to say the least. But as we did go up there and we were trying to be so careful and trying to hide, we were just hiding behind logs. She knew we were there and just walked straight past us, stopped, looked at us and walked on. She was very, very, I don't want to say comfortable, because I don't want to suggest that, you know, she was at all, you know, we were assimilated or habituated, but she knew that we were there and she knew that we didn't, you know, pose a threat. It was kind of, you know, living together, you know, in symbiosis. So yeah.
Cool. I think we have time for a few more questions. We talked about the issue, well, I guess not an issue of finding food, but the food source. There were a lot of questions about, like, if the coastal wolves were typically this petite structure, or if it had anything to do with food source.
Yes, they are. Again, from what I understand from the research done by the scientists kind of over here, I don't want to get kind of into too much scientific terminology, because if I make a mistake, I don't want to be held up for it. But from what I understand, they are genetically different to their kind of inland cousins. Through their, they moved onto the coast and have lived there because they have a completely different food source. Again, I think because the temperatures don't drop so low, they don't have to have the much bigger pelts. They are much thinner and much smaller wolves. I've never seen the grey wolves, so it's hard for me to give a direct comparison. They're pretty big animals, but they're from what I understand, they're not as big, and they are as thin. And you have to imagine, so a lot of the time when people see these images on social media, people are saying, oh, this wolf is so malnourished, so unhealthy. No, trust me, this wolf is very, very healthy. There's a lot of food around.
Great. Last question. Well, this is kind of a three-parter.
Okay, good. I like that.
The first part is, from a 7-year-old budding photographer, what was the most difficult aspect of photographing the wolves? How did you navigate the challenge? And kind of lumped in with there too, there's a lot of questions just asking what photography equipment you use, lens, camera, all the good stuff.
Okay, I could spend hours talking about this, so please cut me off at any point. Photographers, we always like to talk about equipment. Okay, so for the young chap, I love the fact that we have young people in the audience asking questions, because you guys literally are the future, literally. And actually, I'd much rather share images with your kind of age in order to inspire you guys, and hopefully you guys can be the sledgehammer that's going to make the change. I would say, as a young budding photographer, the hardest thing isn't being out there, it isn't finding the wolves, it isn't doing any of that stuff, even though that is very hard. As a young photographer or a photographer getting into this, the hardest thing to do is just deal with the sacrifices you have to make along the way in your life in order to do this. You have to fight so many people in order just to get out there and do this. And this is, I shouldn't say fight, but you have to negotiate with family, with friends, with, people who have expectations that you should be doing this or you should be doing that. Wildlife photography, but wildlife photography especially, is an incredibly financially unrewarding job. Some people get to make it big, and most people don't. However, making money isn't the success. The success is getting 7-year-old photographers into it in order to help them save the future for the other animals. So it's understanding what success is, and really kind of realizing that you have to give up a lot of what most people expect from kind of normal life in order to get to go and do these things. Without sounding too pessimistic, but then actually being out there, look, it's one of the most wonderful things being out there and photographing these wild animals. If you find yourself in nature at all getting bored on waiting for an animal for 10, 12 hours straight, wildlife photography is not for you. If you're just fascinated with the natural world and you could sit there for hours on end looking at everything, then wildlife photography is for you, because it really does take a long time and a lot of effort to do it. In terms of camera equipment, yes, this is another really big, kind of hurdle that you have to battle with in order to do the kind of things that we do. Wildlife photography generally demands the most expensive equipment, and it's the heaviest, and it's the most unwieldy, and it's just, I could go on for ages. We're using a range of different cameras. I do a lot of work with Canon, and actually I was just using the Canon R5 camera that's just kind of been released. It was pre-release at that point, and so it was all shot with the R5. I use a 600mm lens, sometimes with teleconverters on there as well. The other guys, we also had a number of red cameras up there with the Canon 50-1000 lens, which if anyone knows about this lens, it's, you know, probably costs the same as about 4 cars. It's a very expensive piece of equipment. As red cameras are, you know, we were, you know, kind of up there with, you know, about $500,000 worth of equipment. It is really expensive. Yeah, there's absolutely no doubt. However, you can go and do these kind of things with not as expensive equipment. You just have to spend more time and be, you know, accepting of more failure. A good camera is just going to give you a higher success rate. A longer lens is just obviously going to, you know, get you a bit closer. So yeah. Hope that helps.
Hope it helps too. Thank you so much, Steve, for joining us tonight. These photos were amazing to look at and just hear the story. And with that, I'm going to bring up Christina.
Pleasure. Look, I just wanted to say, if it's okay, I just wanted to say to everyone in the audience, you know, look, if you have questions that haven't been able to ask, or if you want to talk about wolves, or if you want to talk about other wildlife, I'm super enthusiastic and I love to talk. Please, by all means, just, you know, jump onto my website, or Instagram is probably the kind of best social media to use at the moment for photographers. So, you know, jump onto Instagram. I'm Steve Woods Photography. You can find me. There's lots of wolf images on there. You can always just message me and email me. And yeah, anyone wants to come with the wolves, give me a call. Thank you so much.
I do also want to mention, anyone asking about the video that we played for, that Steve just played, Christina did drop it in the chat, so you can find the link there if you want to watch it again.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thanks again, Steve.
Thank you so much.
All right. Hi, Christina.
Hi.
So just wanted to say another thank you to Bridgett, Kent, and Steve. We always love our presenters, so excited to have them on for tonight. And thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. Let's talk about next week. So next week we are going to the extreme. Well, me and Christina aren't, but we're bringing in scientists that do. So we're going to hear stories about tornado chasing, diving into the ocean's twilight zone, working on a research aircraft flying into wildfire smoke, and also what it's like to trail law enforcement into illegal cannabis sites that are committing environmental crimes. So that's all next week. Yeah, join us.
Yeah, it's going to be super exciting. So you should subscribe to our YouTube channel. So when we come back next week, so you won't miss it. And I told you all this news last week, and I see that some of you mentioned it, but we're so excited that the Academy is finally reopening next week. And so we're open to members and donors on the 15th and 16th, and then finally reopening to you on the 17th. And so please come by. We miss you so much. But you can still find us here every week on Night School. And again, the Academy has been closed for basically the last 12 months. So if you're comfortable giving anything, there's a link to the Academy Relief Fund in the YouTube description. I'll drop the link to the video that Steve was talking about again, because I know a lot of you want to watch it. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. All right, good night.
Good night.